Hey guys, welcome to our AP Biology video on animal behavior. I wanted to start you off with this first quote. This is actually from a psychologist. He says, scientists have reported that elephants grieve their dead, monkeys perceive injustice, and cockatoos like to dance to the music of the Backstreet Boys. And while scientists have actually found that that is true, certain parrots and cockatoos that have some vocal mimicry behaviors can actually dance to the tempo of a song and will change their dancing as the tempo changes. And parrots and elephants can share this ability, just like humans can, this dancing ability. And people think, and scientists think, that that's actually because they both have the ability to mimic vocal sounds, which suggests that dancing ability could be an evolutionary byproduct of the brain circuitry that allows us and parrots to learn to speak. So maybe we can dance because we can talk. Pretty interesting, though. So let's talk about our objectives. So as an AP student, you should be able to do a couple of different things within the realm of animal behavior. Justify scientific claims using evidence to describe how timing and coordination of behavioral events in organisms are regulated by several mechanisms, connect concepts in and across domains to predict how environmental factors affect responses to information and change behavior, and analyze data that indicate how organisms exchange information in responses to internal changes and external cues, and which can change behavior. So we're going to talk about some different types of animal behavior today to get the content out of the way, but we're going to practice some of these different objectives in class later this week. So, what drives animal behavior? Animal behavior is regulated. The timing and coordination of behavioral events are regulated, which increases fitness of individuals and the long-term survival of populations. So keep that in mind. All of these behaviors, natural selection is going to favor them if, of course, they increase the fitness. And the fitness, again, is our organism's ability to survive and reproduce and pass on its traits to its offspring. So let's talk about timing and coordination in behavior. Behavior is regulated by several means. So individuals can act on information and communicate it to others. So for example, there's a species of monkey that can notice a predator in its habitat and then communicate the presence of that predator to other monkeys within the area through certain vocal noises. And there's actually a very interesting Radio Lab episode of this that I encourage you to go check out if you're curious. I'll link it in the bottom of this video. Of course, these responses are vital to natural selection. Down here we have some greater snow geese, which I'll talk about in a second when I talk about migration. So responses can be triggered by environmental cues, and some of these responses can be hibernation, migration, estivation. Some courtship rituals or other visual displays can be dependent on timing as well. And of course, photoperiodism in plants, again, not animal behavior, but we talked about that already. So these greater snow geese actually migrate to the tundra in the summer, and they usually live within 5 miles of the coast near lakes or rivers. But during migration, what they do is they follow a very narrow corridor of migration every year to go to this environment during the summer and winter, which is pretty interesting. So we'll talk more about migration later in the video. Okay, so along the lines of communication and cooperative behavior, we can see this within or between populations, and it's going to contribute to the survival of individuals and survival of the population. So, for example, we can have a change in a resource availability lead to niche partitioning or niche partitioning, however you want to pronounce it. An example of this that you'll see commonly is the warblers. These are types of birds that occupy different strata of the same tree within the same habitat. So these are actually birds that are going to live within certain strata of the tree, and they're not in competition for habitat space with other species of warbler. They're going to be living within the same tree. It's pretty interesting. All right, individuals can act on information and communicate it to others. So some innate behaviors that organisms have, these are inherited behaviors. Remember that they come through, they're passed down from their parents through their genes. An example would be building a bird's nest or a spider knowing how to spin its web. But behaviors can also be learned, and these are going to occur through interactions with the environment and other organisms. Animals have sensory organs that can detect and process external information. So whether this is the photoreceptors in your eyes that are going to detect the light and then send signals to your brain, which are then going to help us send other signals that are going to release certain hormones and tell us, when to react certain ways and help us direct our circadian rhythms, etc. Or it could be an auditory signal that an animal senses the sound of a predator approaching, and all of these are very important. All right, here's an example of a learned behavior is behavioral imprinting. You might have heard of imprinting before, of organisms that they see an adult organism right after birth and they automatically believe or take this this learned experience and think that that adult is their mother. Another behavioral imprinting example is these indigo buntings that are going to migrate at night and navigate by the stars. But experiments have shown that they must know where the North Star is in order to survive and do this migration, and they have to learn this within the first few weeks of their life. If they don't, they're not going to be able to follow the migration that the rest of the birds follow. And so it's something that is imprinted early on within the first few weeks of life. It is permanent, but if it's not learned, these birds are sort of lost as far as individuals of the species go. All right, feedback is also very important in animal behavior. Organisms respond to changes in environment through behavioral mechanisms as well as physiological, but such as hibernation and migration. Of course, you know bears hibernate, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. Okay, so here we go. What is hibernation? Hibernation is a relaxed state of inactivity among endotherms. What happens is your metabolism and your body temperature is lowered for days or even months, and some mammals even are going to release hormones that are going to lower their metabolic rate. So we have extended torpor, an extended state of very low metabolism, so it's energetically it conserves a lot of energy. It's not energetically costly. Bats and chipmunks are common examples of this, and this is generally going to happen seasonally within most animals that are going to hibernate, and generally it's going to be mammals or other endotherms. Okay, migration. Migration is relatively long-distance traveling of animals on a seasonal basis. We'll see migration in all major animal groups. And it's going to be caused by changes in the external environment. These could be climate changes, availability of food, season of the year, breeding purposes. But most animals that migrate do so to find food or more livable conditions, and some, of course, migrate to breed. So our example over here is our Atlantic salmon, or Salmo salar is the scientific name. And then after they have a good year of growth, they are going to move to sea surface currents, and the currents are going to help carry them back to their natal river where they were born. And so they'll surf through the currents, traveling thousands of kilometers, and then when they're going to reach their natal river, they're going to find it by smell, which is pretty interesting. So again, taking those environmental cues to have them influence behavior. And what's interesting is only 5% of Atlantic salmon actually go up the wrong river. So 95% of them are going to be able to be successful if they reach that part, finding their natal river where they were born, and actually end up breeding back in their original birthplace. Okay, let's talk about taxis. So taxis is movement, not taxis, taxis, movement directed toward or from a stimulus. Many prokaryotes exhibit chemotaxis, so we talk about chemotaxis in bacteria, which is a change in a bacteria's movement pattern in response to chemicals. But there's lots of types of taxis. So let's talk about telotaxis, which is a goal-directed movement. It's going to describe the motion of a visual predators who can seek a distant visual signal and then move in the direction of that signal to attack. And so we have an example of telotaxis right here. There's plenty of types of taxis, though, but remember that taxis is not a random movement. It's directional, and it's going to be either toward or away from a stimulus. But kinesis, that is a random movement. And it's going to be a random movement in response to a stimulus. It's non-directional, and so an example would be a movement of woodlice in relation to the temperature around it. When humidity increases, the position of the woodlice is more likely to remain stationary because they like the humidity. Another similar example are the pill bugs. Now, you guys had some experience with these in our lab, and pill bug activity is going to increase when the environment is dry, and then they're going to increase their non-random movements. It's non-directional, but they're still moving around, hoping that eventually they're going to end up in a more humid environment, which the pill bugs actually prefer. And then once they're in that humid environment, their activity is going to decrease. But again, it's not towards or away from the dry environment. It's just non-directional. Okay. Behavior can be cooperative as well. So communication among individuals within a population may increase the long-term success of the population. Again, a theme we're seeing here. Some benefits of cooperative behavior include protection from predators, acquisition of prey and resources, sexual reproduction, recognitions of offspring, genetic relatedness, and of course transmission of learned responses. So it helps if you cooperate among different organisms so you can transmit that to other organisms of your own species. Now, living systems have a variety of signal behaviors or cues that produce changes in the behavior of other organisms and can result in differential reproductive success. One example of this is territorial marking in mammals. A territory is going to be a region occupied by an individual that the individual is going to actively keep out other organisms of the same species. So here we have an example of a cheetah doing some territorial marking. Of course, majority time this is going to be done through urination on a site, so the pheromones are going to influence other organisms, either of the same species or another species, to stay away. So animals use visual, audible, tactile, electrical, and chemical signals to indicate dominance, find food, establish territory, and ensure reproductive success. So some examples of these are bee dances, bird songs, pack behavior in animals, herd, flock, schooling behavior, predator warning, or colony and swarming behavior in insects. So let's take schooling behavior, for example. Fish swim in schools very frequently, and a school has a lot of benefits because it has more sense organs than a single individual, and it can detect predators sooner and find resources more rapidly or efficiently. So those are just some of the benefits that these animals get from ensuring their reproductive success or ensuring their success as organisms in survival. Okay, natural selection favors innate and learned behaviors that increase survival and reproductive fitness. Again, going back to that natural selection, we're going to see these behaviors that are more favorable to these organisms surviving, reproducing, passing their traits on to their offspring. This is a shot from one of the original BBC Planet Earth, talking about birds of paradise and their mating behaviors. But some of the behaviors that have been influenced by natural selection include avoidance behaviors. So organisms learn to avoid things like fences and poisons and traps. It's more beneficial if they don't get caught in a trap and die and can't mate and pass on their genes. Courtship behaviors, mating behaviors, and of course migration patterns all can be favored by natural selection. Okay, so let's talk about some of these cooperative behaviors between different species. We have niche and resource partitioning, which we already talked about with the warblers. These green anole lizards of the Caribbean are a little bit similar to the warblers as well. They are going to occupy, again, different spaces of the same tree, and because they're in different areas within the same habitat, they're decreasing that competition and then thus increasing the rate of survival of these different species within the same area. Mutualism, again, a type of symbiosis where two organisms are going to mutualistically benefit from each other's behavior. We have a gazelle, I think it is here, and these birds. The birds are going to eat parasites that live on the gazelle. The gazelle will benefit by the parasites being taken care of, and of course the birds get a meal, which is great. And of course pollination. There's lots of organisms that are going to cooperate through pollination. This bee here will be able to get the nectar it needs for honey production or whatever, and then the flowers, of course, will have the pollen taken away to other. Excuse me, I lost my thought. The pollen taken away to other areas that it needs to pollinate. All right, let's talk about activity. So we have nocturnal activity and diurnal activity. Now, nocturnal activity, of course, involves animals that are active at night. These are going to have highly developed senses of hearing and smell, along with really developed eyesight, and they also have specialized eye cells, which allow these organisms to see better in the dark. Some benefits to nocturnal activity include there's fewer predators, it's easier to ambush prey, temperature is lower, which again, less energetically costly, if it's not too low, and of course there's less activity, which is going to allow for acute sight and hearing. Diurnal activities are going to be organisms that are active during the day for the most part. So high activity during the day and resting at night. And most animals and most different kingdoms are going to be diurnal. In all of these groups, we have a large majority of diurnal animals. Let's talk about circadian rhythms. So the circadian rhythm is the physiological cycle of about 24 hours that is present in all eukaryotes and persists even in the absences of external cues. It can also manage larger scale activities like migration and hibernation. Melatonin is going to be one of the chemicals that is an internal sleep facilitator in humans, and sometimes we actually prescribe people with melatonin as a treatment for insomnia or the readjustment of circadian rhythms if necessary. All right, I gotta finish the last ones quickly. We're almost done. Now, jet lag is an example of circadian rhythm adjustment. It's the feeling of fatigue as you move across time zones, and this feeling results from the time required to realign the circadian rhythm with the environmental cues of a new time zone, and there's actually a medical word for this. We call it desynchrinosis if you are having jet lag. All right, finally, the one thing I wanted to mention, there's a great question about animal behavior and circadian rhythms on the 2015 release Biology Free Response question. It's the one with these mice right here. I recommend you check it out, review both the question, test it out on yourself, and then go ahead and see the answers that are released on the scoring guidelines. All right, thanks guys, bye-bye.